The last series that I did was the 2010 reverse sweep, where Boston had a 3-0 series lead. Philadelphia won the next 4 to win the series. It almost happened again, and it almost happened again to Vancouver. You know what's really interesting is that Vancouver fans really look back on that 2011 run as being fantastic. And they're right. But we were pretty darn close to the most epic meltdown in Vancouver history. And I would argue that if the Vancouver Canucks had lost this round against the Chicago Blackhawks, we would be looking at a much, much different legacy for the players who played for that team. Because they would have gone out in the first round twice, would have gone, or 3 times in a row, because they had San Jose, LA after this. And they would have been out in the second round twice before that. The team that never would have got out of round 2 at all during that entire run. Now, the Canucks were 54-19-9. Excellent record. 262 goals for, first in the league. 185 goals against, also first in the league. Jennings Trophy shared between Schneider and Luongo. The Blackhawks, 44-29-9. Fourth in goals for with 258. 12th in goals against with 225. But there's Chicago. So even though everything seems to favor Vancouver, it's Chicago. And this is why Chicago scares me as a Canucks fan. So, game 1, first period, Higgins scores from Bieksa and Kessler at 7:03, and then it's Hansen from Samuelson at 10:23. That's your score after 1s, 2-0, after 2, 2-0, and after 3, still 2-0. Corey Crawford, 31 saves on 33 shots. Luongo saves all 32 for a shutout. And maybe it'll be easier, Canucks fans were thinking coming out of that game. Game 2, again, Chicago scares me. Hansen scores from Daniel and Henrik Sedin at 7:30. So after the first period, it's 1-0 for Vancouver. Second period, they make it 2-0. It's a power play goal. Daniel Sedin from Ehrhoff and Kessler at 30 seconds. And don't underestimate the loss of Christian Ehrhoff when you talk about how the Canucks just weren't the same after this Stanley Cup Finals run. I think Ehrhoff missed the Canucks as much as the Canucks missed Ehrhoff. Then Ben Smith scores from Bickle and Campbell at 14:50 to make it 2-1. But Edler scores from Cody Hodgson and Alex Burrows at 19:46. So last minute goal makes it 3-1. Third period, Stallberg scores at 1:56 because they can't quite put Chicago away. Daniel Sedin then scores from Henrik Sedin and Hamhuis at 10:06. And then it's Smith from Frolik and Kane at 12:50. So Chicago makes it closer, but they lose 4-3. Crawford saves 23 out of 27. Luongo saves 23 out of 26. Vancouver's up 2-0, going to Chicago. In Chicago, game 3. And it felt like this was finally their chance to knock out Chicago after 2 straight years of losing to them. First period, power play goal by Duncan Keith. From Taves at 6:54 after 1, it's 1-0 Chicago. And that's where I'm starting to feel in the pit of my stomach. It's going to happen again, isn't it? Second period, power play goal for Ehrhoff from the Sedin twins, Henrik and Daniel, 10:03. And then Daniel Sedin makes it a 2-1 lead 54 seconds later from Edler and Bieksa at 10:57. But before the period's out, in fact, about a minute and a half after that goal by Sedin, power play goal by Sharp ties it from Taves and Kane at 12:40. Third period, Michael Samuelson adds the winner from Henrik Sedin and Christian Ehrhoff at 6:48. The Vancouver Canucks beat Chicago. There you go. Luongo 30 saves on 32 shots. Crawford 23 saves on 26 shots. But during the second period of Game 3, Raffi Torres drills Brent Seabrook with a hit that there was debate about whether it was clean or not. I thought he deserved to be suspended. I thought, seeing that hit, I thought 2 things. 1, that has to be a suspension. It wasn't. 2, how stupid was Raffi Torres? The reason I say this is because the Canucks are in a position to go up 3-0. The Hawks to this point just didn't quite look like the Hawks. And Raffi Torres woke him up. I still think the series changed on 2 things. Raffi Torres drilling Brent Seabrook and making them kind of angry in Chicago. And then the return of Boland. So game 4, the one that starts my Tourette's up in this series. First period, it's Bickle from Frolik and Boland at 1:43. Boland. Then power play goal, Salo ties it from Edler and Raymond at 4:46. Second period, 1-1 tie. Campbell scores from Kane and Crawford at 5:18. And then it's Keith from Frolik and Boland at 5:35. Then Boland scores at 14:45. At this point, I am convinced the Vancouver Canucks had no idea that Boland was in the lineup, who he was, or what was going on, because then Frolik scores from Boland and Hjalmarsson at 18:57. Commence Shannon wandering around his apartment screaming, Boland! Boland is killing us. How is this happening that it's Boland? No offense, but it's Boland. He's not a superstar. He's not Kane. He's not Taves. And it's not Kane or Taves that's doing it. Third period, power play goal. Sharp gets into the action. He gets a power play goal from Kane and Taves at 2:49. And then they score on the power play. Sharp again from Hossa and Campoli at 13:21 to make it 7-1. Vancouver gets another goal. It's a power play marker for Daniel Sedin from Ehrhoff and Kessler at 16:24. Luongo saves 22 out of 26. Schneider saves 6 out of 7 in relief. And Corey Crawford saves 21 out of 23. And all I kept saying was, they can't stop Boland. How in the hell did this happen? So we're going into Game 5 in Vancouver. All the Canucks have to do is win at home. And they've got it, right? That's all they got to do. First period. Power play goal. Hossa from Keith and Crawford at 5:54. And then 24 seconds later, it's Keith from Johnson and Kruger at 6:18. And then at 12 minutes and 17 seconds on the power play, it's Kane from Keith and Campbell. Again, the Tourette's was acting up that night as well. After the first period, I'm wandering around again saying, that's it. Going to blow a 3-0 series lead. I watched the Bruins do it last year. Now I'm watching Vancouver. Second period, Hossa scores from Sharp and Bickle at 1:26. And then Keith scores from Hossa and Sharp at 4:47. Third period, no scoring. Chicago destroys Vancouver in Vancouver 5-0. I would argue the most humiliating defeat that the Vancouver Canucks would suffer in these playoffs until Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals. And this is a problem I had with that core. This is a problem I had with that team. Everybody would point at Luongo and I would say, no, this is a team effort. You lose 12-2 over 2 games, both of them games where you have a chance to knock a team out. And that to me means maybe it's bad prep. Maybe you can put it on the coach. Maybe it's just a lack of intensity by your top players. Maybe fans were right about the Sedins that had that criticism. But whatever it is, this is humiliating. Losing 12-2 over 2 games. Going from a 3-0 series lead to 3-2, and now you're headed back to Chicago. In Chicago, first period, Daniel Sedin from Henrik Sedin and Burrows at 2:06. Bickle then scores from Boland at 14:51. So there goes my Tourette's again on that one. Burrows scores at 18:48 to make it 2-1 for Vancouver. Second period, Boland ties it from Kane. 15:08. I'm half expecting him to be Candyman with how many times I'm saying his name. Third period, Bieksa puts the Canucks back in the lead from Raymond to Burrows at 58 seconds, but it is a penalty shot goal by Frolik at 2:31 that ties it up again. So we go to overtime in Chicago. Ben Smith from Hjalmarsson and Hossa at 15:30. Ben Smith had a pretty good series. Schneider, 17 saves on 20 shots before he's replaced by Luongo, who saves 12 out of 13, including the overtime shots. But he's your goaltender of record. He takes the loss. Crawford, 32 saves on 35 shots in the victory. Rough night. Game 7, Vancouver. To say that I would have been tense that night, probably an understatement. You want a game where you wanted a live stream of my reaction, that would have been it. First period, Burrows scores from Kessler and Raymond at 2:43. I'm not celebrating. Through the first period, through the second period, still 1-0. Third period, less than 2 minutes left. At home. It is a shorthanded goal by Taves from Hossa and Seabrook at 18:04. Ties the game, sends it into overtime. Perfect. You had a 3-0 series lead. 7-2, 5-0, 4-3. Now you're at home. You need overtime. The most Canucks thing that Canucks ever did. In overtime at 5 minutes and 22 seconds, Burrows scores the goal that would be remembered all over as the one that finally got the Canucks over the hump. What drove me nuts was this game and this game, 4-5. And again, this is why when people say Canucks are the greatest team that didn't win a Stanley Cup, again, I know I'm harder on them because they're a team I cheer for, but the one thing that always drove me nuts with Vancouver throughout this run was just they couldn't go in for the kill. They just didn't have, I don't know if it wasn't that instinct, if there was something at their core. They just didn't seem to have that it factor when they needed it in big games. So they win it. Crawford saves 36 out of 38 in the loss. Luongo saves 31 out of 32 in the victory. Luongo would have a great series against Nashville, great series against San Jose. The Canucks take out Nashville without a whole lot. Well, let's be honest. Ryan Kessler took out Nashville. And then against San Jose, the Sedins step up again. And then, of course, we go to the Stanley Cup Finals where scoring is not a thing for the Canucks in that Finals. But this 7-2 game, this looks a lot like the 8-1 game that Vancouver suffered through in the Finals. This 5-0 loss at home in this series looks a lot like that 4-0 loss at home they would suffer in Game 7 against Boston. So that's why when I see people saying, I can't believe he doesn't think the Canucks were the greatest team that didn't win a Stanley Cup. These are the reasons why. And it's not a dislike for Vancouver or being overly nitpicky. It's just some of those big games where they had a chance to close out a series and just you'd watch that game and go, do they realize what's on the line tonight? It doesn't look like they do. That killer instinct you're looking for that the Hawks had, where if they had to cross a line, they'd cross it. And it just didn't feel like the Canucks got there often enough. Duncan Keith had 4 goals and 2 assists in this series. Boland in 4 games had 2 goals and 4 assists, because of course he did. Hossa 2 goals, 4 assists. Kane a goal and 5 assists, and Taves with a goal and 3 assists for the Blackhawks. They kept Kane and Taves off the board. They only got 1 goal out of each player, and yet it took them 7 games and an overtime to get rid of them. Crawford was 3-4 with a .927 save percentage. Corey Crawford was pretty solid. On the Vancouver side, Daniel Sedin, 5 goals, 2 assists. Burrows, 3 goals, 3 assists. Henrik Sedin had 5 assists. Ehrhoff, 1 goal, 3 assists. And Ryan Kessler had 4 helpers. His goals would show up in the next series. Luongo was 4-3 with a .903 save percentage. Schneider, no record, .878 save percentage. Chicago in this series had 76 penalty minutes. Vancouver had 126. One last thing, too, that I would mention in this. Mark Recchi admitted after he retired that there was no team he ever hated more in a playoff series than those Vancouver Canucks. And I got it. I did. Kessler and Burrows could be really yappy with other teams. And you had Lapierre, who wasn't the cleanest player. You had Rafi Torres, definitely not the cleanest player. A lot of penalty minutes taken by this team. And a lot of it I felt was justified. And I know there were Canuck fans at the time like, I can't believe we got a penalty there. And it's like, the Canucks, A, they were beaking off at the refs a lot. And B, there's a lot of stick work with that team. And so while I don't think they necessarily had a lot of the physical toughness for fighting, boy, they were a chippy team. And they made it pretty easy for the referees to give them penalties too. So it's quite the year to look back on now that we're about a decade out. But I understood why fans around the rest of Canada hated those Canucks. I totally got it. When they would show like Burrows and Kessler, jawing with the other bench and laughing at the other bench, and I'd be like, okay, guys, you're not going to fight, right? So knock that off. What are you doing? And I had that feeling too with Boston at times. Sean Thornton, for instance, in the finals against Vancouver that year, he was kind of like, I'm going to challenge the whole bench. He was doing that during the pregame, and I'm like, okay, Thornton, just knock it off. But and I understand there's room for that in hockey, but for me, that was one thing. I always understood why fans elsewhere were like, I really don't like the Canucks. And be like, I get it. Sort of like the Blue Jays the last year they were in the playoffs, where apparently they were very unpopular with other teams because they were cocky. So that attitude sometimes can make it so teams will come out and do their best not to lose, where they're like, okay, I can handle losing, but not to those guys. And I got the feeling of that with Boston. And I got that feeling with Chicago as well, that they would come out just a little bit tougher against the Canucks. And when they were down 3-0, they really showed that fight back. The Canucks win this one in 7. They made it tough. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And it is fun to look back. It is fun to look back at these series. And so I will go with 2012. And no, I'm not going to talk about the 2012 Canucks, who were President's Trophy winners that then lost to the Kings that year. I will find a different series because that one really was anticlimactic because it was over pretty quick. But we'll find something in between now and then. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.